What's up, Chaos Shinobi here. Summary: Naruto was abandoned at birth and everything comes to light after the wave mission. Naruto decides to quit being a leaf ninja. Will he be able to forge his own path? Let's begin. Chapter 8. On the road to Wave, Team 7 along with Tazuna were walking down the path towards Wave Country. They were in a diamond formation around Tazuna with Sakura at point, Naruto and Satsuki at the sides and Kakashi at the rear. Sakura was making small talk with Tazuna about their village and Kakashi had just explained to her the division of the ninja villages. Naruto was looking around at the scenery happily as this was the first time he had ever been outside. Satsuki was just indifferent and was walking silently while Kakashi was reading his book. "Hey loser, what are you smiling about?" she asked and he looked at her with a smile. "This is the first time I've ever been outside the village." "Have you ever been outside the village walls, guys?" he asked and Sakura nodded happily. "Of course, my parents are merchants and I've been to several villages before," she chirped happily. "Yeah, I've been outside too before when I was small for clan affairs," Satsuki said and Naruto nodded. He didn't want to ask her any further and bring up any bad memories. Looks like he was the only one who hadn't been outside the village. Maybe that was because they all had families that took them out for some reason. He mused, then shook those depressing thoughts out and continued gazing down the path. "Are you sure they are ready to protect me?" Tazuna asked nervously, hearing Naruto hadn't even been outside the village before. "Yes, this is a C-rank mission and will consist mostly of thieves and bandits with no ninja encounters and a Jonin can handle them no problem. Plus, I'm a Jounin, an elite ninja, so there's no need to be worried about," he said with a nice smile and got back to reading as Tazuna nodded nervously and drank some more sake. Kakashi appeared the normal outside but was getting suspicious with his nervousness but kept it in the back of his mind for the time being and kept to his reading. They walked for a few hours until noon when they walked past a puddle. Kakashi glanced at it but kept walking when suddenly two figures came out from the puddles and charged at Kakashi. They wrapped their chains around Kakashi and pulled as he was torn apart to pieces. "One down," one of them said, and they charged at the Jonin. Satsuki and Naruto each took on one of them as Satsuki threw a shuriken at their chains and Naruto lodged in a kunai through the hole as both delivered a roundhouse kick to their faces and yanked at the chains. Naruto made a cross-hand seal and molded the required chakra. "Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu," he yelled as 10 clones puffed into existence and dogpiled over the two missed ninjas as a beatdown ensued and they were knocked unconscious. Satsuki took out a kunai and went ahead to slash their throats as Naruto caught her wrist and she glared at him and he glared back as she backed away. He rarely ever got any emotions besides his happy and smiling nature and she knew he didn't want her to kill them. "Why would you show mercy to them? They came at us with the intention to kill. We should return the favor. Or have you forgotten about what they did to Kakashi?" she said, annoyed, and he let go of her wrist as she rubbed it and he narrowed his eyes at her last remark. "They can have information that can be useful to the mission and more intel which could help our village if interrogated. They are worth more alive than dead, and as for Kakashi, you don't think they actually got them with that lame ambush now, do you?" he asked, and she looked back at the spot where Kakashi was to see splintered logs and immediately deduced he used a substitution jutsu. She huffed and walked over to them, tying them up with ninja wires as clapping was heard. "Excellently executed and perfect teamwork. You kept your cool and decided what was best for the team and the village by keeping a level head. I'm proud of you, Naruto. Satsuki, the way you immobilized them was perfect by taking their advantage with the chains, and your teamwork with Naruto was flawless. Sakura, you instantly were on guard to protect the bridge builder and didn't interfere knowing combat wasn't your forte and accepted your weakness and did the best for the team. I'm proud of all of you," he said with a nice smile as Sakura smiled and Naruto grinned foxily and rubbed the back of his head, blushing in embarrassment, and Satsuki smirked at his reaction. "Don't let it get to your head, loser. You just got lucky," she said smugly, and he fumed at her. "Why, you little," he said as Kakashi held him back chuckling, and she smirked smugly and he got even angrier and struggled. All right you two, that's enough bonding," he said, and they both huffed and looked away and Kakashi sighed while Sakura just giggled at their antics. "Now Tazuna-san, we need to talk," Kakashi said, and Tazuna gulped and decided to take his mind off of it. "If you were alive, then why did you let the Jonin do all of the work?" he asked. "Well, I was watching everything and would have interfered if they needed it, but they didn't. They need experience in the field and they just gained it. As for why I didn't do anything and hid, I did to see who their target was," he said, and Tazuna started sweating. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well, if they were after us, then they would have most probably left after I was done for or went after the Jonin. But their entire focus was on you. I saw your reaction and it was clear you were expecting something like this. Now I know you had your reasons, but lying to us about the mission parameters is unacceptable. I'm afraid the mission is done," he said coldly as Tazuna was shocked. "What, you can't do that? Please, I'll die if you don't help me, and my grandson and my daughter will die too. Gato is going to finish the last hope of the land of waves and make us his slave. Please don't abandon me," he pleaded, and Kakashi shook his head and told the team to come to the village with him as Sakura too agreed, thinking this wasn't a mission for Jinan, and Satsuki just followed his orders and they started walking back to the village as Tazuna cried and held his head down. After a moment Kakashi saw Naruto wasn't with them and saw him standing beside Tazuna. "Naruto, let's go, this mission is over, we don't have to go on anymore," he said, and Naruto shook his head. "No sensei, his country needs this bridge, it's their last hope. I know what it feels to be helpless and I won't let their hopes die. I will complete the mission even if I have to do it alone," he said, and Kakashi narrowed his eyes. "Naruto, the mission is over, I am your superior officer and order you to come back to the village. Let's go or I'll report you for insubordination," he threatened, and Naruto smiled. "Alright, go ahead sensei, I'll deal with it when I get back after the mission. And didn't you teach us those abandon their comrades for rules were worse than scum?" he said, and Kakashi's eye widened as an image of Obito came to his head. "The loser is right, I am not going to let him show me up and disgrace the name of the Uchiha clan, I'm going to," said Satsuki, and Sakura too agreed with them and both stood beside Naruto, who nodded with a smile, and Kakashi sighed. "Then I guess we have no choice but to go on. I'm going to hear about this later from the Hokage, I know it. Let's go," he said, and they all walked after Kakashi left a message with Pakun to take the demon brothers for interrogation with the Anbu, who ran off to the village. Team 7 kept on walking and then came up to a shore as they took a boat to the land of waves, and after a few hours the bridge came into view. "Wow Tazuna-san, that's a great bridge," said Naruto, and the whole team nodded in agreement while Tazuna smiled proudly. "Of course it is, after all the greatest builder in the elemental nations built it," he said smugly, and Satsuki snorted as he face-faulted and Naruto snickered. Eventually they came to shore and started walking again. After a couple of hours of walking they were startled as Satsuki threw a kunai at the bushes and a white rabbit ran off from it scared. Naruto and Sakura sighed in relief and dropped their guards while Satsuki grunted at throwing a kunai at a stupid rabbit. A snow rabbit with white fur in summers, he was raised indoors by the looks of it. He was most likely used for a substitution jutsu. Looks like the enemy is already here," he thought, expanding his senses when a whistling sound was heard through the air. "Get down," he yelled as all of them dropped down on the ground and a huge cleaver embedded itself on the tree and a man with bandages over his mouth stood over its hilt. Kakashi walked forward and stood in front of the man as he chuckled. Oh, no wonder the demon brothers were defeated. After all, their opponent was the copy ninja Kakashi of the Sharingan Eye. "You were in my bingo book at the top of the A-ranked ninjas list during my days in the Kiri Assassination Squad with a kill on sight order. Your description said the man who copied over 1,000 jutsu," he said, and Naruto and Satsuki narrowed their eyes at the Sharingan in his name profile. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the Bloody Mist, ex-member of the Seven Swordsmen and former commander of the Kirionbu Assassination Squad. "Went rogue after the attempted assassination on the Mizukage Yagura," he said, and raised his forehead protector, and Zabuza chuckled. "Ah, I get to see the Sharingan in action, I'm honored," he said as Kakashi opened his left eye to open the three Tomoe Sharingan as both Naruto and Satsuki had their eyes widened. "What's this Sharingan everyone keeps saying?" asked Sakura. "The Sharingan is a rare and powerful Kekkei Genkai found rarely in the members of the Uchiha clan. It gives the user the ability to comprehend any nin, gen and taijutsu." Satsuki answered through gritted teeth at seeing the Sharingan in the eye of a non-Uchiha. He only had one and it was always on, so he kept it covered to cope up with the chakra drain it must cost him, which meant it was transplanted, she surmised. Sakura nodded and Naruto kept a hand over her shoulder and smiled as she calmed down and kept it in her mind for later. "Alright team, this battle's way out of your league, so stay back and let me handle it. Protect the bridge builder with the Manji formation. I taught you teamwork, now use it," he said, and they all covered Tazuna. "Looks like I'll have to take you down to get the old man, Kakashi?" he said, and made a half-ram hand seal and molded a huge amount of chakra. "Ninja art, hidden mist jutsu," he said as a thick chakra-laced mist enveloped the field and Zabuza disappeared. "Which will be my attack point? Larynx, lungs, spine, liver, jugular, subclavian artery, kidneys or the heart?" he said, and a huge amount of killing intent flooded the fields and all of them trembled as Kakashi too leaked his own killing intent. Satsuki was getting too frightened and brought her kunai to her neck to kill herself from the pressure and suffocation. "Satsuki, calm down, I won't let my comrades die," said Kakashi, calming her down as Zabuza appeared in between the four. "Oh, I wouldn't be too sure about that," said Zabuza as he swiped his sword, and Kakashi appeared in front of him and stabbed his kunai in his gut as he fell in a puddle of water. Zabuza appeared behind him and swiped his sword at him. "It's over," he said, and cleaved him as Kakashi too fell in a puddle of water. "What, the water clone jutsu? He copied my moves even in this mist?" he said as Kakashi put a kunai on his neck from behind. "Now it's over," he said, and slashed his kunai in his neck as he fell in a puddle of water, and the real Zabuza kicked him in the lake. As Kakashi swam to the surface, he saw the water as too heavy when Zabuza came behind him and went through hand seals. "Water style," Water prison jutsu, he said, and Kakashi was trapped in a sphere of water and Zabuza chuckled. He created a water clone. Run, take the bridge builder and leave. The fight's over, he can't make the water clone go far from him, so run, he shouted. Running is out of the question. The moment you got caught, that option went out the window. He'll just chase us down and hunt us if we run. The only option is to get you free. Thought Naruto. Satsuki, I've got a plan, you hear me? He asked as she smirked at him. Yeah, I hear you, she said as Sakura stood back to protect the bridge builder. He nodded back as Zabuza chuckled. You brats think you're ninjas? You're just brats with shiny headbands. When you make it into my bingo books, then maybe you could call yourselves ninjas, he said, chuckling. Hey, eyebrowless freak, said Naruto as Zabuza twitched. Put this in your bingo books. The boy who will one day surpass all the Hokages and who never gives up. His name's Naruto and this is the day he bested you, he said as Zabuza had a tick mark on his head. He made a cross-hand seal. Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu, he shouted as 30 clones came into existence and covered Zabuza. Ooh, shadow clones, and there's quite a few of them. Maybe you have some skill with that big mouth of yours, he said as they all dogpiled him and he pushed them away as Satsuki came from above him with an axe kick that he blocked and she backflipped and went through hand seals. Fire style, grand fireball jutsu, she said and launched a fireball at him as he jumped back and laughed. Is that all you've got? He mocked them. Hell no, I've still got this, Naruto said and threw a demon wind shuriken over to Satsuki, who opened up its blades. Demon wind shuriken, windmill of shadows, she shouted and launched the shuriken at the original Zabuza, who caught it when a second shuriken came up from behind him. He jumped over it and laughed. Ha, as if a shuriken could hit me, he mocked, and Satsuki smirked as the shuriken puffed into Naruto, who threw a kunai at his arm. Eat this, he shouted as Zabuza let go of the sphere of water holding Kakashi and charged at Naruto with the shuriken, which Kakashi stopped and glared at him. He stood up as both had their hands locked. That was an excellent plan, Naruto. Your unpredictability never ceases to amaze me. You and Satsuki did great, he said as both Shinon smirked while Sakura had a small blush on her face as she stared at Naruto, and the way he had handled the situation was perfect in her opinion. I just lost my concentration on the water prison, that's all there is to it, said Zabuza as Kakashi snorted. Don't flatter yourself, you were forced to let go, he said as Zabuza snarled when Kakashi threw his shuriken away and jumped back as he started going through hand seals when Kakashi's Sharingan eye widened and he too started going through the same hand seals. Sharingan. Both Naruto and Satsuki whispered as they saw both Jounin go through a long chain of hand seals and finish a Tori at the same time. Water style, water dragon jutsu, both said in unison as two water dragons rose up and clashed with each other as Zabuza and Kakashi engaged each other in weapons combat. Zabuza was perplexed as to how the two jutsus were executed at the same time. Amazing, he copied so many hand seals and mirrored the jutsu back to him instantly, perfectly so. That's the power of the Sharingan wielded by someone who has mastered it, thought Naruto as Satsuki too had the same thoughts going through her mind. Zabuza got furious as he jumped back and went through hand seals as Kakashi finished before him and launched the jutsu. Water style, giant vortex jutsu, said Kakashi as huge vortex of water washed away Zabuza, who was stunned beyond belief. Impossible, can you see the future? He said as he coughed and Kakashi stood above him with a kunai in his hand. Yes, and your future is death, he said coldly, going to finish it when two senbon needles came and pierced his neck and Akiri Hunter Nin appeared there. Thank you for weakening him enough. I've been after him for a long time now, he said as he picked up the body. Hey, you can't take his body and sword like that, shouted Satsuki, taking out a kunai as Kakashi held her back. Calm down, Satsuki, he's a hunter nin. It's his job to dispose of rogue ninjas of his village and stop the enemy from gaining village secrets, he explained, and she grunted and turned back as he left in a swirl of wind. Kakashi covered up his Sharingan with his forehead protector as he turned to Tazuna. Tazuna-san, we would need a place to rest and treat our injuries if you don't mind, he said, and Tazuna nodded. Of course, my house is close, we can stay there. Follow me, he said, and everyone nodded and started to follow him as Kakashi fell down face first. Kakashi-sensei, shouted Sakura and checked him over as the other two Jinan came besides her. He has severe chakra exhaustion and will need a week of rest to recuperate, she said, and both of them nodded, trusting her little medical skills that she possessed. Naruto put Kakashi on his back as Satsuki was too tired from the two battles and Sakura couldn't carry her weight and walk at a decent speed. They came up to a house besides a lake as Tsunami answered the door and they asked for a room for Kakashi, and she showed them the room upstairs, and Naruto laid Kakashi down as they all waited downstairs for him to wake up, and Naruto sent out some clones for scouting and Sakura was checking over Kakashi constantly while Satsuki slept as she was exhausted from the two battles. Kakashi woke up a couple of hours later as Sakura called Naruto up and he woke up Satsuki and both walked up to his room. Well, my Sharingan drained me too much. I guess I am getting out of shape, he said, and Satsuki spoke up. Where did you get the Sharingan? You're not an Uchiha and it is definitely transplanted. Did you steal it? She asked coldly as Naruto put a hand over her shoulder, calming her down. Satsuki, Kakashi-sensei isn't the type of person to steal someone's eyes for power. I'm sure there must be a big reason for it, he said, and she nodded and turned to Kakashi, who I smiled at the blonde and was happy for his trust in him. This was entrusted to me by my teammate during the midst of a mission during the Third Great Shinobi War. In those days I used to follow rules blindly and decided to leave my teammate Rin, who was captured by Iwa Shinobi, in favor of the mission, but Obito went after her, not caring at all about the mission. Eventually I followed him and we both fought off those shinobi and freed Rin, but the Iwa ninja made the cave fall with an earth jutsu. I had my left eye slashed and couldn't see the boulder coming over me and he pushed me away. He was crushed under the boulder and his whole right side was crushed. In his last moments he entrusted me with his Sharingan. It is his last memento and legacy I have of him, he said, and Satsuki looked down in shame at accusing him of stealing it without even a second thought, and Naruto and Sakura had tears in their eyes. Well, that's enough about me, but I have to say I'm proud of the way you all handled yourselves against opponents stronger than yourself. But I have done a lot of thinking and I suspect Zabuza is alive. The hunter nin used senbon needles that can put a person in a death-like state. I think he'll be back in maybe 2 weeks after recuperating from the injuries I gave him in battle, and we can assume the hunter nin will be there with him this time, he said, and they all were stunned. Then sensei, what will we do now? Asked Sakura and Kakashi. I smiled. Why, train you guys of course, he said, and Sakura argued, but Kakashi-sensei, you could barely defeat him even with your Sharingan. What good will a little last-minute training do to us? She asked. But Sakura, it was you guys who saved me from the water prison and defeated the demon brothers. I'll take care of Zabuza, but you guys will fight the hunter nin and protect Tazuna while I deal with him, he said, and they all nodded. Alright, rest and recuperate tonight. We'll start your training early tomorrow morning, he said, and they all nodded. They had dinner as they heard the story of Keza there and slept. The next morning, they all woke up early next morning as they had breakfast, and Kakashi took them to the forest on crutches and stopped in a clearing. Alright, my cute little Jinan, today we'll be climbing trees, he said with an eye smile as everyone looked at him as if he was stupid. But sensei, how is climbing trees going to help us fight Zabuza and that hunter nin, Kakashi-sensei? Asked Sakura with a blank face, and Naruto too was now starting to doubt him. And to think I was starting to gain a little respect for that lazy-ass pervert, said Satsuki, and Kakashi's sweat dropped. Now have a little faith in your sensei. Now we will climb trees without using our hands, he said, and the whole clearing was quiet as a crow croaked and his sweat dropped. He walked up to the tree and started walking, and after 2 steps he slipped down and landed flat on his back. Naruto and Sakura snickered while Satsuki shook her head. You know that we have to fight Zabuza. Get serious already, this isn't helping you any in the respect department either, she said coolly, and he glared at her. Hey, my concentration slipped, that's all, he said indignantly, and she smirked. Sure, whatever makes you sleep well at night, she replied coolly, and Naruto and Sakura laughed harder, and he glared at her and then walked up the tree and then stood upside down on a high branch. Whoa, that's so cool, sensei, is it a jutsu? Asked Naruto, and I smiled at the blonde. No, Naruto, this is simple chakra control. You send chakra to the soles of your feet and then stick to the tree. Too much chakra and you blow off, too little and you slip, he said, and threw 3 kunai at their feet. Use these to mark your progress. Now get to it, he said as he sat down on a branch and took out his book. All of them ran up the tree as Satsuki slipped after 10 steps while Naruto blew off after 7. Sakura made it all the way to the branch and sat down on it as Kakashi smiled. Well, looks like Sakura here has the best chance to become a good ninja. So much for someone who is going to surpass the 4th Hokage, and looks like the Uchiha clan isn't as great as people make them out to be, he said as Sakura glared at him for belittling them, and Satsuki and Naruto grit their teeth and looked at each other, then ran up the tree, and he smiled. Looks like he pressed the right buttons, he mused. Sakura, you should keep going as long as you can, it will help increase your chakra reserves, he said, and she nodded and started going up and down for a couple of hours before she was exhausted and sat down under the tree. She saw Satsuki was 3/4 at the tree while Naruto was just at half. She was surprised as Naruto came up to her and crouched down in front of her, and she blushed at the closeness. PSSD, hey Sakura, how did you do it so quickly? He asked her, and she was surprised that he asked her for help. She told him to clear his thoughts and focus only on the task, and he nodded. Kakashi smiled, seeing this. Looks like Naruto was getting the point of asking for help and not doing everything alone like Satsuki. Sakura and Kakashi went to the house to rest as Naruto took her advice and immediately rushed a good distance past his previous mark and smiled. Satsuki saw this and grit her teeth and tried even harder, but after an hour she saw she wasn't making good progress and Naruto was getting closer to her. She finally decided to swallow her pride and walked up to him as he looked at her curiously. Hey loser, what did Sakura tell you? she asked through gritted teeth, and he raised an eyebrow and then smiled mischievously. Why does little Satsuki-chan need help? I thought Uchiha were the best, the elites, he said teasingly, and she fumed and grabbed his collar and brought his face in front of her mere inches away. What did you say? She asked, growling, and he grinned mischievously and kissed her nose as she yelped and backed away, a rosy red blush on her face as he laughed, holding his sides, and her eyebrow twitched. She walked up to him and bashed his head into the ground. Pervert! She muttered and walked away as he rubbed his head. Just clear your head and focus on the task and you'll do fine, he said, and she didn't say anything but took his advice and ran up the tree. She immediately blew past her previous mark and smirked as both kept going late into the night, and then limped back home as Naruto had to carry her on his back since she couldn't even stand. They had dinner when suddenly the little boy spoke up. Why? He whispered as everyone looked at him curiously. Why do you even try? You can't win against Gato, the weak always lose against the strong. Why do you even try? He asked, and Naruto replied, well, at least we are doing something. Your grandfather and mother is trying to end his rule here and we are training to fight him. At least we aren't whining. Just as the first Hokage used to say, under the wing of a strong leader cowardice cannot survive. He finished as Inari glared at him. What do you know of suffering? Always smiling and laughing, you don't know what it's like to suffer, he said as the room became quiet and Naruto's hair shadowed his eyes and the spoon in his hands dropped. He started whispering to himself, but everyone heard him. Suffering? You don't know what suffering is. You have a family who takes care of you. You have a mother who treats your wounds when you get hurt and kiss and love you to sleep. You don't know what some people would give for that. You weren't beaten and glared at for your whole life. You didn't have to stay alone your whole life. You weren't almost raped. Be glad what you have. You don't know what it's worth until you'll one day lose it. Sensei, I'm not hungry, I'll go for a walk for a little while, he said, and walked out as the whole room stayed quiet while Inari was wide-eyed. Sensei, what? Naruto said it was just to make Inari understand, wasn't it? Sakura asked as Satsuki too gazed at him with a lot of interest. No, Sakura, that was what Naruto faced all of his life personally, and that was the watered-down version of it. I was there after the night he was beaten for 4 hours and almost raped, and believe me, it was one of the worst conditions I had seen a 7-year-old child in, and I have been through a war. He was almost going to commit suicide if the Sandaime hadn't come in time. I don't know what would have happened. How he stayed sane after that and turned out the way he did, it still amazes me. His will is stronger than any I've ever seen, he said as he lowered his head down in shame at the guilt he felt. Sakura cried while Satsuki was wide-eyed at what she had heard. She didn't know how he still was so optimistic at heart and wasn't taking his revenge on the villagers as she stood up to go behind him, but Kakashi caught her wrist and she glared at him. Let me go, the loser needs someone right now, she said coldly, and Kakashi wasn't fazed. Sometimes a person needs to be alone, and sympathy and pity only makes things worse. You should know that better than anyone. Let him cool off, you'll be fine. Have faith in him, he said, and she yanked off her wrist and walked up to her room, and he sighed. Inari had run off as Tsunami chased after him when he had finished talking. Sakura too went to her room with Satsuki. Satsuki didn't sleep that night as she thought again and again to what Kakashi had told her. Loser, how the hell are you the way you are? Why don't you want revenge against them? Why do you hide yourself behind that mask of yours? Tonight I saw those broken eyes that you hide, and they are even worse than mine. How are you still that way? She thought to herself and tried to sleep but couldn't. Naruto was fighting many of his clones and blowing off his steam as he thought to himself. I shouldn't have lost my cool like that just because a little boy provoked me. Just as the second Hokage wrote, a shinobi doesn't show his emotions, weakness and vulnerability be known to anyone besides himself. They are what weaken one's resolve and waver his will. He recited in his head and popped the last clone with a roundhouse kick as went through hand seals and ended at Tiger Fire style. Dragon Flame Jutsu, he shouted and blew an arrow stream of yellow flames as they burnt right through to 2 trees, and he fell unconscious as the jutsu drained every last bit of his chakra. Next morning, the clearing in the forest. Naruto was woken up the next morning with a groan as he saw a beautiful girl in a pink kimono with black hair and brown eyes shaking him up, and he woke up. He was irritated that he was so out of it that he wasn't even aware of her until she shook him awake. He looked up and saw that he had slept in the forest and that it was morning. You shouldn't sleep out here or you'll catch a cold, she said, and he smiled at her. Yeah, I know, I fell asleep from exhaustion after training too much last night, he said as he rubbed the back of his head embarrassed, and she giggled. Why do you train so hard? I see that you are a shinobi from your headband, but you seem plenty strong already, she said, and he blushed at the praise and said, yeah, well, I have to get stronger to one day surpass all the Hokages. That's my dream, and to help my friend achieve her dreams too. I want to be strong enough to protect myself and everyone precious to me. I want power and to be strong. That's my dream, to be stronger than everyone so no one can hurt me or my precious people, he said, and she smiled. Those are good reasons to getting stronger and gaining power. You fight to protect others, that's what make you strong. You'll get strong, really strong, she said smiling, and he blushed again. "Well, why are you here so early this morning, miss?" he asked, and she smiled. "My name's Haku and I'm here to collect some herbs to treat a friend of mine who's hurt," she said, and he nodded. "Well then let me help you collect them. What do they look like?" he asked, and she smiled and showed him an herb, and he too got to picking herbs. At the house, all the people in the house were eating breakfast except Tazuna, who had already gone to work on the bridge, and Inari, who was still sleeping. Suddenly Tsunami spoke up. "Naruto didn't come home last night? Is he alright?" she asked, and Kakashi smiled. "Yes, he's a ninja and can take care of himself. Must have fallen asleep outside from training too hard," he said, and she nodded. Suddenly Satsuki stopped eating and wrapped up a couple of rice balls and picked up a can of juice from the fridge as she started walking out the door. "Where are you going, Satsuki?" asked Sakura as she spoke without turning around. "That loser is sleeping out there and is most probably hungry. I'm going to wake him up and give him something to eat before he dies of hunger or gets eaten by wild animals," she said, and Kakashi smiled at her concern. She wouldn't show it for anyone other than him, he knew. "Well, you really care about him, don't you?" he asked, and she glared at him with a faint blush on her face. "I don't care about him. We need him to be alright to complete the mission, that's all there is to it," she said, and opened the door. "Sure, whatever makes you sleep better at night," Kakashi said, and she glared at him and walked out. She went through the forest and to the training clearing where they trained yesterday and saw Naruto talking to a pretty girl and felt a pang of jealousy in her chest and hid behind a tree to hear her giggling at a joke he made. She heard her ask him about his whisker marks and grew furious. What was that slut asking that for? She thought furiously and then saw her walk off as she passed by her, and Satsuki threw her a death glare as she walked over to Naruto, who was in his normal happy mode thinking about something with his arms crossed and was in deep thought. She bonked him on the head as he yelped. "Hey, what did you do that for?" he asked, rubbing his head, and she just glared at him as he shrunk under her glare, and he stood over him like a mother with her hands on her hips. "You idiot, what the hell were you thinking running off like that last night and spend the whole night in the forest? You even skipped out on breakfast. What do you think would have happened if some of Gato's goons would have found you here knocked out unconscious?" she asked him in a threatening voice as he shrunk further under her gaze. "And who was that girl just now?" she asked, and he looked up confused and then smiled. "Ah, that was Haku-chan. She woke me up and was collecting herbs for her friend, so I helped her," he said, and she gazed at him, and he shrunk and was nervous as she looked to be undressing him with her eyes, and then she sighed and tossed him the rice balls and the juice as he looked at her curiously. "You didn't have dinner properly last night and trained till you dropped and now skipped out on breakfast, so eat up. I don't want to be on a team with someone who fainted from hunger and stupidity," she said, and he twitched at her last remark but then smiled at her gratefully. "Arigato, I really appreciate it," he said softly and dug in as she smiled a small smile, but he didn't notice it as he was too busy eating. "So why didn't you tell me about what you said last night? Don't you trust me?" she asked as he finished eating and looked at her with a guilty smile. He didn't like to hide anything from her, and she too trusted all her secrets with him, and that made him feel all the more guilt. "No, it isn't that, it's just that I really don't like talking about that night. It was one of the worst moments of my life and I want to forget that night altogether," he said as a tear rolled down his eye remembering the night, and she wiped it off with her thumb as he smiled a fake smile at her to reassure her, but she saw right through it. "No need to hide your emotions from me. I can see right through your mask," she said, rubbing his cheek as the dam he had kept to hide all of that pain for all the years broke, and he broke down as she embraced him and brought his face in the crook of her neck and ran her fingers through his hair. Naruto wrapped his arms around her and held her tightly as he cried. He hadn't cried since that night, not even to Inoiki Yamanaka, who was assigned for his medical checkup, had been able to break his mask. He cried for an hour before he fell asleep in her arms as she put his head on her lap and leaned up against the tree she was sitting at as she smiled and ran her finger on his whisker marks as he purred, and she giggled. She knew what bottling up such pain and guilt weighed down on the person and was glad he trusted her without his mask. Kakashi had seen everything as he was leaning against a tree. He was glad that Naruto let go of the burden after all these years and that Satsuki had made him open up his heart to her. He hadn't even trusted the Sundaime to drop his mask as they were worried about him bottling up such pain. He saw Satsuki playing with his whiskers and giggling like a schoolgirl at his purring, and I smiled. She didn't even realize what she felt for the boy. He mused and walked away, deciding to give them the day to be alone and would take Sakura with him to the bridge. Naruto really was unpredictable to melt the Ice Princess of Konoha like that, he mused as he imagined a new version of Icha Ice Princess Chronicles and giggled perversely. Naruto woke up 3 hours later to see Satsuki running her fingers through his hair and sighed contentedly and wrapped his arms around her stomach and buried his face in it, and she wrapped his arms around his head and held him. "Arigato," he whispered, and she smiled a little smile and held him even closer to her with her loose sleeves of the white battle kimono completely hiding him within her arms. "It's alright," she whispered back, and Naruto got up after 15 minutes of staying in her arms and was now sad at losing the warmth and her beautiful vanilla scent, and the same thoughts were running through her head as she liked holding him like that, though both shook them off. Though both now had faint pink blushes on their faces from those thoughts. "Alright, let's start where we left off yesterday," she said, breaking the silence, and he nodded, both going to the trees laced with their kunai marks from yesterday and started their tree climbing. Both were making almost equal progress and were pushing themselves even harder not to be outdone by the other. At the bridge, Kakashi, Sakura and Kazuna came to the bridge as Kakashi sat on the side reading his book and put down his crutches by the side as Sakura too came by beside him. They saw as some of the workers came up to Tazunai after a few hours. "Hey Tazuna, we can't work on this anymore. We have families and you two should quit it before Gato comes here," one of them said as Tazuna turned to them stunned. "What? But we are so close to finishing the bridge, don't quit now," he said pleadingly, and they shook their heads. "Tazuna, we have made our decision, you two should come with us, think of your daughter and grandson," one of them said to him as his expression hardened. "I am doing this for them. Go and leave, cowards, but don't say you did this for your family. You did it to save your own skin. Now get out of my sights," he said coldly as they all left, ashamed at themselves by his words, as he started working on the bridge, and Sakura too came up to help them while Kakashi smiled. He too would have helped if not for his crutches. In the town, Naruto and Sasuke were walking through the town looking for something to eat and then saw the condition of the town and were disgusted at Gato for bringing it down to this condition. The houses were on the verge of falling and there were many people on the streets, and the stores had nearly nothing except some rotten and old things. Suddenly Naruto felt a tug at his pants and looked down to see a little girl there who placed her hands in front of her. "Hey mister, can you give me something to eat please? I'm hungry," she asked innocently, and his eyes watered as he crouched down, and the girl was scared that she had offended him and would hit him, but instead he wrapped his arms around her and hugged her close. She too hugged him back happily, and he frowned inwardly. She felt so frail and thin in his arms. It reminded him of the days when he would have to starve at the orphanage as punishment and how much hunger hurt. "Hey, don't worry, I have some food you can have, all right?" he whispered, and she nodded in his chest. He put her down and took out his storage scroll as he took out some of his sealed food and handed her some bags of chips, some fruits and some chocolates he took with him before leaving the village, and she took them and was amazed at what he had given her and threw herself into his arms and cried in his chest as he rubbed her back affectionately. "It's alright little one, there's no need to cry," he cooed to her as she stopped crying and smiled at him. Satsuki saw all of this from the side and smiled herself. He was too kind for his own good, she mused as she remembered how he had helped her after the massacre. "Where do you live, little one?" he asked, and she looked around and then pointed to an alleyway, and now Naruto was confused. "In the cardboard box there," she said innocently as his heart broke, and he asked for her hand as she put it in his hand, and they walked to a secluded part of the forest near the river and was near to the village as well. He again took out his storage scroll and channeled some chakra into it. Out popped a tent, a sleeping bag and some camping supplies that he used, which was almost new since he didn't really use it much and it was his first time outside the village. He set up the tent and camping supplies for her and took out a blanket too he had and handed it to her as she was looking at him confused. "You will live here from now on, little one, until we free the village from Gato and then find you a place at the orphanage or at some other establishment, and I would even pay for your stay there, so don't worry of being alone anymore, alright? I'll bring you food every day for the time I'm here and don't find you a place to stay," he said, and she cried and threw herself in his arms as he held her close and rocked and cooed her. There little one, there's no need for those precious tears now, is there, a little one?" he asked, and she nodded and wiped away her tears. "Haruka, my name's Haruka, not little one, Mr. Blondie," she said with a hiccup, and Satsuki giggled at his nickname and he glared at her. "Well, my name's Naruto. But you'll always be my little one now, won't you, Ruka-chan?" he asked and started tickling her, and she pleaded for him to stop. Satsuki smiled. He was so good with children, she mused. Finally, they saw that it was evening and time for them to leave, as Naruto had played with her the whole time while Satsuki just sat aside and watched them, with Haruka sometimes pulling her with her to play too, and she did have to play a few times. "Alright Ruka-chan, it's time for us to go back. I'll see you tomorrow, alright, and I have made you some dinner and kept it for you in the tent, so I'll see you tomorrow, alright," he said, and her eyes watered as she threw herself at him and he caught her. "Hey, I'll come back tomorrow, don't worry about it, alright," he said, and she held on to him tighter. "No, don't go out if you don't come back like my mom," she said with hiccups, and he rubbed her back, calming her down. "Ruka-chan, I promise you I'll be back, and I never go back on my word, for that's my nindo, my way of the ninja," he said, and she clung onto him. "You really mean it?" she asked softly, and he wiped her tears away with the sleeves of his jacket and gave her a smile. She too smiled a little and kissed his cheek and let him go. He felt bad for leaving her alone, but he had made some clones and hid them around transformed as rocks and rubble to keep an eye on her, and he promised himself it was only for a few days. Satsuki just walked beside him and kept glancing at him from time to time, seeing his happy-go-lucky smile, and kept wondering how he turned out like this even after everything he had endured, and was a complete mystery to her even after all these years of knowing him, she mused. At the house, Naruto and Satsuki came to the house to see everyone on the dining table and sat down on their chairs facing each other. "So how was training today?" Kakashi asked, though he knew they didn't train too hard as they weren't as exhausted as they should have been, but he mused it was good for them to take a break every once in a while, and it would give them a bit of relief from the pressure of the upcoming battle, and they trained too hard in his opinion and had to take a break or they might crack under pressure and they might make mistakes when the time came. "It was alright though, we didn't train too much today. We were pretty exhausted from yesterday and decided to take it easy just for today," answered Satsuki, and both Kakashi and Sakura nodded. They trained too much in Sakura's opinion too, especially Naruto, she mused. "Naruto, will you be able to make some clones to help out Tazuna-san at the bridge? They have a little shortage of workers, you know," asked Sakura, and Kakashi too nodded and looked at him expectantly. He was already going to make a clone pumped with enough chakra to last the day for Haruka and leave some clones for scouting around her all throughout the day. That, coupled with the clones at the bridge for helping in his own training, would leave even him virtually exhausted at the night, as he would have to leave some clones pumped full of chakra for the night too, he deducted. But the village needed his clones and the bridge to be completed as soon as possible to bring the country back on its feet. Satsuki too came to the same conclusion and knew he would refuse Kakashi, as he wouldn't want to be so exhausted for just helping the bridge building. She was broken out of her thoughts as she heard him answer. "Sure Kakashi-sensei, I'll do it, don't worry, the village needs the bridge and I will help in any way I can," he said, and gave a glance at Satsuki to tell her to shut up for now, as she was looking at him incredulously, and Kakashi smiled. Sakura, Tazuna and Tsunami too smiled and thanked him, and he just rubbed the back of his head and said it was nothing. He walked up to the porch on the lake and sat down as Satsuki sat down beside him and was about to reprimand him as he spoke up. "I know what I'm doing and I will help the village in any way I can. I always have had chakra to spare, and if it helps them then I'll do it," he said, and she replied, "Even with your stamina, doing this much is too much strain even for someone with your stamina. And it isn't a one-day either deal, you will have to keep it up for 2 weeks. Why don't you just say no to them? Why do you go so far for a village you barely even know?" she asked in an annoyed tone, and he threw a rock in the lake. "Because they need help and I can help. I don't care if I know them or not. With the bridge many other children like Haruka and their families can have a nice life and no one should suffer like that," he said, and she looked at him stunned. He was willing to do all this for people he barely knew. Now the mystery around him was getting even more thicker, and she said nothing, and both just sat and gazed at the star-filled sky. "You really are an idiot, you know that, right?" she asked in a playful way, and he smiled. "Yeah, I've been told many times by a certain raven-haired bitch," he said equally playfully with an innocent smile, and she glared at him. "Bastard," she said, and he chuckled, and she too cracked a smile. Kakashi was there behind them leaning against a tree out of their notice and had heard everything. He smiled reading his book, though no one knew how he read it in the dark, as he walked back to the house, though he wouldn't spill out that he had heard everything but was proud of Naruto. "Sensei, he really is your son. You must be proud watching over him now, wouldn't you?" he thought to himself, and walked back to the home. Time skipped 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks ever since Naruto met Haruka that day in the town, and he had kept his promise to her and visited her every day. He always left a clone to play with her pumped full of chakra to last the day before he switched himself with it in the evening and left scouts for all day around her, and she was happy as hell. She started considering him an angel apparently that her mother used to tell her about, and sometimes called him Angel-kun, much to his embarrassment and Satsuki's amusement. He left 50 clones every day for helping on the bridge and also trained till he was almost dropping from exhaustion. This was the reason today Kakashi, Satsuki and Sakura were standing outside ready to leave as he was snoring away in the bed. "Don't you want to take Naruto with you today?" asked Tsunami, and Satsuki snorted. "That loser is exhausted from trying to do everything on his own until exhaustion and is now almost as good as knocked out," she said in an annoyed tone, and Kakashi smiled. "Let him sleep in today, he has been keeping this up for 2 weeks now. Send him to the bridge at noon," he said to Tsunami, and she nodded as they left to the bridge with Tazuna in tow. A couple of hours later Tsunami was doing the dishes as the door to the houses burst open and 2 men with swords came in as they smiled evilly at Tsunami, who started throwing things at them. Naruto woke up in an instant to the sounds of things breaking and Tsunami shouting to Inari to just get back. He stepped out of the window and walked down the wall using the technique he and Satsuki had perfected a couple of nights ago and watched from the window to the kitchen as two men were holding Tsunami and Inari and were taking them out. He instantly created two shadow clones and used the henge to turn them into Tsunami and Inari, then used the substitution jutsu with them and replaced them with the clones. Tsunami and Inari were surprised as they saw themselves standing beside Naruto after they felt a strange sensation and not in the arms of the thugs. One of the clones dropped a bomb as sleeping gas covered the floor as the clones dispelled and the thugs fell unconscious. Naruto went upstairs and changed and got into his equipment as he came down to see Tsunami and Inari there. "Thank you a lot, Naruto-san. My son and I are grateful and owe our lives to you," she said, and Inari nodded as he started crying and Naruto put a hand over his head. "Inari, you did great and didn't let them take your mother without a fight. You two have someone precious to protect and now have the will of fire that all great shinobis of the Leaf Village possess," he said, ruffling his hair, and the boy smiled and nodded. Naruto started jumping through the trees towards the bridges, felt a spike of several different chakra signatures there and knew Zabuza and that hunter nin had made their move. At the bridge, Kakashi, Sakura, Satsuki and Kazuna came up to the bridge to see dead bodies of several workers lying around and were disgusted at whoever had done the deed. Kazuna moved to a worker who was breathing his last breaths and asked him who did all this, and he replied in a whisper, "Demon," and fell dead. Suddenly a thick chakra-laced mist covered the bridge and they were instantly on guard as Kakashi flared his chakra and dispersed the mist around them as he saw two silhouettes walking towards them through the mist from the other side of the bridge. Suddenly everyone heard Zabuza's voice as he and the hunter nin from before come into view. "So Kakashi, we meet again. Where's the blonde brat from earlier? I kinda liked his style, you know?" he asked, and Kakashi replied, "He'll be here, don't worry, just worry about us for now," he said as Zabuza chuckled. "Is that right?" he asked mockingly and created 4 water clones and they all got on guard. "So Satsuki, would you like to do the honors?" he asked, and she smirked and channeled chakra to the soles of her feet and vanished in a blur of speed as the 4 clones splashed down in water and she stood there in her stance, and Zabuza chuckled. "Looks like you have got an opponent for speed, haven't you, Haku?" he asked, and she nodded. "So it seems," she replied, and took out Senbon needle on one of her hands as Satsuki held a kunai in her hand. "Sakura, protect the bridge builder. Satsuki, you take on the hunter nin. Leave Zabuza to me," he said, and they all nodded as Sakura stood with Kazuna and Satsuki charged at Haku with a kunai and she blocked with her Senbon needle as both went for hand-to-hand combat. Satsuki slashed horizontally and Haku blocked and went for a punch with his free hand as she twisted around and slammed a kick into her chest and threw her backwards as she smirked. Haku got up and went for the charge as this time they went toe-to-toe and were suddenly locked in a power struggle, trying to overpower the other with their weapons. "I have 2 advantages over you that give me the upper hand," spoke Haku as Satsuki snorted. "And what would those be?" she asked rhetorically. "Well, for one I have 1 free hand, and for the second there's water all around us that helps me do this," she said as she started going through strange one-handed seals and the water rose up in the air and formed a great number of water needles, and Satsuki's eyes widened. "Water style. 1,000 piercing water needles," she said as the needles started converging on Satsuki, and she used her training to channel a huge amount of chakra to her feet and flew backwards, though immediately regretted it as Haku appeared in front of her and slammed a kick to her stomach as she skid backwards on the bridge and stood on a knee panting. "It's time we finish this," said Haku as she went through hand seals, and suddenly the water around Satsuki rose up and covered her up in a dome of big ice crystals. "Ice style. Demonic ice mirrors," she said, and stepped into the mirrors and dissolved in it as her image appeared in all the mirrors, and she spoke, her voice echoing in the dome. "Please give up. No one has ever escaped this jutsu alive. I do not wish to kill you," she said, and Satsuki snorted. "As if I'd give up to a stupid jutsu like that. Only an Uchiha can beat an Uchiha, and I won't die before I have completed my revenge," she said, and stood up as Haku sighed. "Revenge will not help you get stronger or leave this dome alive. Please, I say it again, give up and I'll spare your life," she said as Satsuki charged at the mirror where her image was and suddenly was cut all over the body as she screamed in agony and fell down with cuts all over her clothes and body. "See, you are no match for me, just stay down," she said as Satsuki growled and stood up as she started going through hand seals and ended on Tiger as she breathed in a huge amount of air. "Oh yeah, then take this fire style. Grand Fireball Jutsu," she yelled and launched a huge fireball at the mirrors that melted and cracked a little, then repaired themselves almost instantly. "Fire Jutsu of that magnitude have no chance of defeating my Kekkei Genkai. Resisting your fate is futile," she said as she launched another hail of Senbon needles at Satsuki as she screamed as more cuts appeared on her body and now had some needles sticking out of her body. She got to her knees and panted, trying to think of a way to get out of the stone when Haku spoke. "Why do you resist? Just stay down and you'll survive," she asked as she growled and stood up. "Because I won't lose to anyone and I will not die until I have killed him," She shouted and started molding a huge amount of chakra and again went through hand seals and ended on Tiger Fire style. Grand Fireball Jutsu, she shouted again and this time launched a fireball twice the size of the previous one, but it still didn't do enough damage to shatter the mirrors as Haku launched another hail of senbons as much more of them cut her and embedded themselves in her body and she howled in pain. As she was on her knees and now nearly out of chakra as she had pumped up 2 fireballs worth of chakra in the previous jutsu and was now nearly exhausted of chakra. She was racking through her brains for a way out of the dome as she saw Haku come out of the mirror and stand in front of her with needles in both of her hands as she launched them at her and she tried to move, but the needles had restricted her movements and knew she won't be able to dodge them in time. With Kakashi and Zabuza, Kakashi was himself busy with his own fight as Zabuza created a really thick mist that was even restricting his Sharingan and knew he won't be able to see in the mist himself as Zabuza chuckled. I have deciphered the secret behind the Sharingan through research that me and Haku did on it. It has 2 parts, one the piercing eye that allows you to decipher anything with the tiniest detail which I have blocked with this thick mist, and the hypnotic eye that place one under a genjutsu without even him realizing that I have neutralized by closing my own eyes. He said, his voice echoing in the mist as Kakashi dodged a hail of shuriken. But then you can't see me either, Zabuza. He retorted and expanded his senses as he dodged a slash by the man with closed eyes who vanished again in the mist as he chuckled. Who do you think you are talking to? I am a master of the silent killing technique. I can kill you by sound alone, he said as Kakashi's eyes widened as he realized he was right, but what he said next was what made his blood run cold as he heard Satsuki's scream. And your little raven-haired princess is as good as dead. No one has ever escaped the Kekkei Genkai of Haku alive, he said, and Kakashi spoke calmly. You underestimate my Jinan. I have faith in them, he said, and Zabuza chuckled. Oh, do tell. He asked mockingly and Kakashi smirked. Satsuki is the heiress to the most powerful clan in the Hidden Leaf Village. The Kekkei Genkai is her birthright, he said, and Zabuza's eyes widened. You don't mean? He trailed off. Kakashi continued. Yes, her full name is Satsuki Uchiha, he said. I heard that one child survived the tragedy of the Uchiha clan, but she won't survive. Not even I can defeat Haku using that jutsu, he said, and Kakashi replied. But you forget about Naruto. He too has inherited the sublime abilities of the Uchiha clan, he said, and now Zabuza was shocked. What the Sharingan? But he is barely 12, he couldn't have enough control over it, he said, and Kakashi chuckled. Oh, he awakened the Sharingan when he was 5 and it was sealed off for his protection. But after a certain incident a year later he broke the seal and has had 5 years to gain control over it. They'll be fine, don't worry about them, worry about yourself, he said as Zabuza growled and swung his cleaver at him, nicking him. Then I'll finish you off and deal with that brat now. The Leaf Village has gotten good at keeping such a secret to itself and saving him from the massacre. Maybe I'll take him and sell him off to Kumo for his Sharingan, he said, and Kakashi took out a scroll and smeared blood over it and slammed it on the ground as kanji appeared on the ground. We'll just see about that. You won't leave alive to even attempt it, he said as he got ready in his stance. At the bridge, Naruto came to the edge of the bridge and saw a dome of ice mirrors and was perplexed, but his blood ran cold as he heard a blood-curdling scream, and what made him frightened was that he knew that voice all too well. He walked silently and quickly on the railing and saw Satsuki launch a huge fireball, after which she was nailed with a shower of senbon needles that he didn't even see due to their speed, and scream again in agony as his fists clenched and he unconsciously activated his Sharingan and saw the masked fake hunter Nin come out of the mirrors and stood in front of her as he took out senbon needles in both of his hands. He saw him throw the needles at her and saw that she was trying to move but couldn't move fast enough due to the pain of the needles, and he unconsciously took out 6 shurikens from his back and launched them at the needles as they cancelled each other out, and threw 4 more shurikens at the masked hunter Nin, who jumped back and away from Satsuki as he watched Naruto pick up Satsuki bridal style and jump back as he put her down, and his hair shadowed his eyes as started pulling out the needles from her body, and she grimaced from the pain and was looking at him through blurred vision as she saw the familiar color of sun-kissed blonde hair and smirked a bit as she grit her teeth and spoke from the pain of the needles being pulled out. What took you so long, loser? She whispered out, and he rubbed her cheek affectionately, not even sad that he gave out his tactical position by jumping in. The thought of her in pain and needing him erased all his doubts. Well, heroes always come in at the last minute. Now are you able to move? He asked, and she nodded as her eyes focused and she gazed into his eyes and gasped at seeing the 2 Tomoe Sharingan blazing in both of his eyes. Impossible. How did you cancel out my attack? My attacks are much too powerful for human eyes to follow. Yet you cancelled not one but all of them perfectly. How did you do it? Asked Haku as he raised his head and pierced into her soul with his Sharingan blazing furiously in all its glory as Haku stepped back a little from the intensity of his stare. The Sharingan, she whispered out as Satsuki was too stunned to say anything as he put her down from his lap after taking out the needles, and she stood up as she gazed at his eyes, amazed at the Kekkei Genkai of her clan. So he too has a Kekkei Genkai, A bloodline trait passed down within a clan through generation in blood. This makes everything different. She thought as she stepped into the mirrors and started jumping through mirror to mirror as Naruto tracked her every movement, and she started thinking of what to do next. Even now his eyes are tracking me. She thought as she threw more needles at him, and he picked up Satsuki in his arms and jumped through 3 different spots dodging the needles, but got a couple in each of his thighs. Because of the weight of Satsuki in his arms, his movements were slow even after pumping chakra in his feet. He grimaced and put her down as he created 20 clones as they all jumped at each of the mirrors, and he went through 18 different hand seals and ended at Tiger. Haku started jumping through mirror to mirror, destroying the clones before they reached the mirrors, and was suddenly shocked when she heard a shout and saw an inferno of a narrow stream of flames coming at her, and she barely dodged, getting nicked in her leg as the flames shattered one of the mirrors, and she recreated it by pumping more chakra and jumped into the mirrors again. Fire style, Dragon Flame Jutsu. Naruto finished with a smirk as he panted from the heavy chakra costing jutsus which were coupled now with his Sharingan. I haven't trained and fought much with these eyes, but I can see through her deceptions, he thought as he gazed at Satsuki, who was on her knees and barely hanging onto consciousness from chakra exhaustion. She just had to get mad and use so much chakra to pump up her speed and launch those fireballs like crazy, she mused. She was broken out of her thoughts as Naruto spoke up. Satsuki, don't you fall unconscious on me, I can't fight and protect you at the same time. We have to get out of here alive. So get up now, he said, and she grunted as she tries to stand. Well then, don't protect me, I never asked for your protection. She growled out and fell backwards with a thud. Naruto turned to her and was now worried as he kept tracking the jumping hunter Nin and saw another hail of senbons as he picked up her unconscious body and jumped through 5 different spots, each time getting hit by some senbon needles, and was pumping chakra through his legs to increase his speed. As soon as he touched ground, he saw senbon coming at him from the front and knew they would hit him and Satsuki, and that he couldn't make the jump in time, and turned around taking the shower of senbons in his back and grunted in pain as a trail of blood leaked from the side of his mouth, and he put her down and stood up panting heavily from the exertion and the hits he was taking. He stepped a bit away from her to keep the fight away from the unconscious girl and kept jumping from spot to spot, avoiding all the needles as Haku didn't give him time to counter-attack. Haku launched another hail of senbon needles from the front and he took out a kunai, parrying all of them as he panted heavily. He immediately made a cross-hand seal and summoned another batch of 30 clones and started throwing shurikens, nicking Haku several times as he tracked her with his Sharingan. His mastery over the Sharingan is amazing, and to think he can still stand after fighting so hard and taking all those hits for his teammate and still have the energy and focus to look for a moment to counter-attack is admirable indeed. His will to protect his friend is astounding. I have been targeting his fatal points for a while now, but he blocks all frontal attacks. My chakra is running low and he too is on his last legs with all the clones, his swift movements and the constant use of his Sharingan. But I still have one advantage. I didn't want to do this, but I have no choice. I have to do this for Zabuza-sama. Let's see how strong his will to protect her really is, she thought as she took out another round of senbon needles in her hands. You fight well and your will to protect your friend is admirable and you have great moves. But your chakra levels are running low and you are on your last legs now with all those injuries, she said, and Naruto smirked. You too are on your last legs from the chakra cost of this jutsu that I can see clearly with my Sharingan, and the nitpicks I am giving you are wearing you out too, so we are both in the same boat, he said with a smirk as she spoke up. Indeed you are correct, but I still do have one distinct advantage, she said, and he narrowed his eyes, going through many scenarios in his head as his eyes widened as he realized his mistake a bit too late. This, she said as she launched senbon needles at the unconscious Satsuki as Naruto pumped up every last bit of chakra into his legs and eyes he had left and launched the kunai, which lodged itself where her heart lay as she didn't have time to react, as she had not expected him to throw the weapon at her instead of blocking the needles as he jumped in front of Satsuki and took all the senbon needles head on and smashed his fist in the hilt of the kunai as it was embedded into the heart of Haku, killing her instantly and launching her back as she skid backwards and lied down. Your will to protect your precious person was stronger than I could have ever imagined, Naruto-san. You indeed are a true shinobi. I am honored that you were my last opponent, she said as the life left her eyes and her mask fell from the lack of chakra that was holding it, and Naruto saw the peaceful smile on the face of the girl he met in the forest. Satsuki opened her eyes and saw the dead lifeless eyes of Haku and the kunai embedded in her chest as she smiled and looked at Naruto, was standing with his arms by his side not facing her as she gazed at his back and spoke happily. You did it, loser. You beat her, she exclaimed, but the color drained of her face as Naruto turned her face so that his left cerulean blue eye was visible and saw the blood dripping from the side of his mouth, heavily dripping on the ground passing through the chin. She saw the skid marks of the blood that Haku made from being skid back by his hit and immediately knew that he had taken the death blow for her. Why? Why did you do it, you idiot? she asked as tears streamed down her eyes, and he smirked and turned his face upwards towards the sky and smiled contentedly and closed his eyes, feeling the breeze flowing through his hair. I don't know my body, it just moved on its own. You always were annoying, you know that, right? He choked out and coughed out blood as he started falling backwards, and she caught him in her arms crying heavily. Then why did you do it? I didn't ask you to give your life for me. Why would you do something like this for someone like me? She asked, and he raised a hand and rubbed her cheek affectionately as his vision started blurring in and out. I promised you that I would protect you and help you get your goal, right? He said as her mind flashed back to the moment he promised her that with a foxy grin on his face. Remember, complete your goals and dreams, but don't give in to the darkness. Live happily and achieve your goals, don't let your dreams die. I don't think I'll be there with you to see through them. He spoke as his hand fell and his eyes closed with a smile on his face as her eyes widened as she tapped his cheek. Loser, don't leave me alone, I need you, she said as visions of her waking him up in the morning and him chasing her as she escaped him. Loser, wake up please, she said pleadingly as moments of him making her meals and taking care of her when she was ill came to her mind. Hey Naruto, come on, it's not funny anymore, wake up, she said desperately as she thought back to the arguments they had and the kiss he gave her on the nose as she bashed his head and came to her mind. Please don't leave me alone again, you're the only one I have left. Don't go, not you too, she whispered, crying as the last moment he cried in her arms as held him close to her and he slept snuggling into her came to her mind as she screamed a blood-curdling scream to the heavens as her eyes bled red with a tomoe in each eye. Her Sharingan awakening from the anguish she felt. Naruto! She screamed as the mirrors of ice shattered around her as the chakra dissipated from them, making a sparkling vision as she held him close to her. With Kakashi and Zabuza. Then show me what you can do, copy ninja, he yelled and started going through a long chain of hand seals when suddenly the ground all around him erupted and several ninja dogs came out and latched onto him, pinning him down as he howled in pain. Kakashi walked in front of him and Zabuza growled as he asked through gritted teeth. How did you track me even through this thick mist and no sound? He asked, and Kakashi I smiled at the bound swordsman. When you slashed me with your sword, I let you slash me so that you got the scent of my blood on you for my ninkin to track you and pin you down. Now it's time to end this, he said as Zabuza was shocked at being trumped and fooled like that. Let me show you the only jutsu in my arsenal that I personally created. Feel honored to see it in your last moments, he said, and went through 3 hand seals as he held his left hand out and held his wrist with his right hand as blue lightning circled around him and concentrated in his left hand as he held it in his left hand and glared at Zabuza, who trembled. He is holding the chakra in his hand and it is so dense that it is visible. Is this it? Is this the end for me? He thought as Zabuza saw Kakashi charge at him, tearing the ground through the chakra as he charged at him. Lightning blade, he yelled as he charged at the trembling Kirinin and stopped suddenly as a blood-curdling scream was heard through the bridge. Naruto! He heard and his eyes widened in horror as they heard clapping through the bridge and both turned around to see Gato there with an army of thugs grinning. Well, look at the demon of the mist, he said sarcastically as the thugs laughed and Zabuza glared at him as the lightning in Kakashi's hand disappeared as he gazed at the image of Sasuke crying and holding onto a lifeless Naruto and a dead Haku as tears rolled down his eyes. Naruto, looks like I have failed you again. Sensei, please forgive me, he thought solemnly as Sakura and Tazuna rushed over to Naruto as Sakura tried to check over Naruto but Satsuki won't let him go. Gato, what is the meaning of this? He asked as he left. Well, Zabuza, you are too expensive to pay. I'll take your bounty and those of the Leaf Ninja that you have weakened for me and then swarm the village with my army and kill the bridge builder myself, he said as the army cheered as Zabuza growled. Kakashi, it seems we are no longer enemies, he said, and Kakashi nodded as the ninkin vanished and he picked up his sword and tossed it to Zabuza, who nodded gratefully and charged at Gato with blinding speeds through the crowd of thugs who stabbed him as he cleaved the short man in half and took out as many thugs as he could until only 50 remained as he fell down dead. Hey, he killed our meal ticket. Let's swarm the village after killing these shinobi. I've heard even dead shinobis are worth a good amount and we already have 2 dead mist ninjas and a dead leaf shinobi. Then we'll swarm the village, their leader said, and they all cheered as Satsuki stood up furious that they wanted to sell the body of Naruto for money and stood next to Kakashi when an arrow lodged itself in between the 2 groups as they gazed back to see Inari and the villagers with weapons and ready to fight as Kakashi I smiled and created 50 simple clones and Satsuki created 5 as the thugs stepped back in fright. Alright, who wants to fight? Asked Kakashi, and they all ran back to the edge of the bridge and jumped into the boat and ran off. The villagers cheered and were celebrating when a huge burst of demonic chakra released from Naruto as it swirled around him and a feeling of bloodlust washed over the bridge as silence permeated through the bridge. You should be grateful to your father, you damn brat, who tied your soul with mine with that accursed jutsu. If I wouldn't have been taken to the Shinigami too, I would have enjoyed watching you die. Be grateful to your father who put me inside you. The fox said in his mind and pumped his chakra, forcing as much as he could through the tightly bound seal. The wounds on Naruto started healing as the senbon needles popped out of his skin and color started returning to his skin as the red chakra made a cloak around his body and then receded. A few moments later Naruto woke up groggily and stood up, rubbing his aching temples as gazed at the stupefied looks of his teammates and Tazuna, and grinned foxily, rubbing the back of his head. "So what did I miss?" he asked innocently as the whole crowd face-faulted except Satsuki, who ran up to him crying as he thought she was going to hug him, and smiled. Slap. The sound rang through the bridge as Naruto turned stunned at the trembling girl who had tears running down her eyes. "Hey, what did you do that for?" He trailed off as Satsuki crashed her lips on his and wrapped her arms around his neck as he was wide-eyed. Then after a moment he held her closer, wrapping his arms around her slender waist as they kept their lips locked, and after a few moments the two broke off and Satsuki buried her face in his chest with a trembling body as his shirt was getting soaked from her tears, as he had on hand rubbing her back affectionately while the other was running through her silky raven locks as he put his chin over her head and pulled her close to him. "I thought I had lost you, that I would be all alone again. Please don't do it again. I would have killed myself after burying you. I can't go on living in loneliness and fall into the darkness. I need you. Don't do anything like that again," she said in between hiccups, and he cooed her and kept holding her. "I'm alive right now, right? I am not that easy to kill, you know. Those little needles won't kill me. At the very least a blast enough to level Iwa would be needed to take me down and away from you," he said playfully, and she giggled and punched him in the chest playfully. "Bastard," she whispered, and he smiled. "Bitch," he replied, and both chuckled as they broke off to see the whole crowd staring at them as they came out of their own world, and both blushed heavily as Satsuki gained an annoyed look on her face. "Hey, we just freed your country right now, go on and celebrate or something, and if you keep staring there might be some villagers short at the inauguration of the bridge. Now buzz off," she said in an annoyed tone as the villagers scrambled, seeing her glare with the Sharingan that she activated for a moment before. All members of Team 7, Kazuna, Tsunami and Inari laughed as they started walking back to the village. Kakashi asked about the battle in the ice dome, and after they explained everything he told them the result of his battle and that he was proud of all of them, and they all showered and changed into their night clothes. Naruto went to his room and got into his bed and closed his eyes. Kakashi was going to enter the room he shared with Naruto when Satsuki caught his wrist and stared at him. "Let us share the room for tonight. I want something answered to me alone and want the answers now." "You can share the room with Sakura for tonight," she said, and he nodded and stepped back. He knew when they explained their battles and Naruto told him he had used one of his special abilities, that he had used his Sharingan as a last resort, and that she wanted answers. But he wasn't going to miss his chance of teasing his cute little Janan. "Don't do anything I wouldn't do," he said, and she twitched. "No one would do half the things you would do with all that smut you keep reading. That's why you don't get a girl and have to read the book, you lazy-ass pervert," she said, and I smiled. "True, but you don't have to be that hostile to your sensei. A little respect sometimes would be nice, you know," he said, and she smirked. "It would, wouldn't it?" she asked, and stepped in, and he sweat dropped. He wasn't going to respect it anytime soon, he mused as he entered the room he had to share with Sakura, who instantly screamed and threw him out of the window before he could explain. "Don't get back in here if you value the thing that makes you a man, now you pervert," she shouted, and closed the window, and he brought his hands near his crotch and cried anime tears. No one respected him, he thought, and now he had to sleep outside. Satsuki stepped inside and saw Naruto laying down on the futon and got in with him as she wrapped her arms around his waist and put her head on his chest as she snuggled closer to him. She had slept with him before to sometimes avoid the nightmares she had of the massacre. Naruto was startled and stiffened when someone got in his bed, but when he saw the familiar mop of silky black raven hair on his chest he smiled and wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her closer as she snuggled into him. "Did you have a nightmare again, Satsuki-chan?" he whispered, and she shook her head. "No, I wanted to ask you something alone and couldn't wait till morning. That's why I sent the lazy pervert away for the night," she said, and he chuckled at the respect she had for his sensei. He knew she hated perverts with a passion, and Kakashi with his books all the time wasn't her favorite person in the village, he thought. "So what did you want to ask?" he whispered, and she asked. "Why didn't you tell me of your Sharingan?" she asked, and he sighed. He knew this was coming. "You remember that night that I don't like to talk about?" he asked, and she nodded slowly. "Well, I found out that I had it on that night. So I didn't get to tell you about it and was going to tell you after we got back to the village, but this happened," he said, and she nodded. "So are you an Uchiha?" she asked hopefully, and he shook his head, smiling sadly. "No, I asked the old man and he told me I didn't belong to the Uchiha clan, but didn't say much of my heritage. When we get back I'll ask him to reveal the truths, and then we can find out the truth about these eyes and my connection to your clan," he said, and she nodded, and both stayed silent for a few moments before Naruto spoke up. "So you awakened your Sharingan, congratulations," he said, and she stayed silent, and he was confused as to why she wasn't happy. "I don't like the way I awakened it," she whispered, and he was confused. "Didn't she awaken it in the heat of battle?" He thought to himself, why? How did you awaken it? He asked, and he felt his shirt get wet and saw that she was crying silently. The pain and anguish of seeing your death due to my weakness forced them to awaken, she whispered, and he rubbed her back affectionately and she calmed down. He hated her seeing so weak and vulnerable and was himself guilty for making her like that. I'm sorry, because of my weakness you almost die. She was cut off as he spoke up. Don't apologize, I would do it again in a heartbeat if we were in the same situation again. I don't regret it and neither should you, he said calmly, and she looked up at him. He saw an emotion in her eyes that he had never seen before. Warmth. She leaned up and captured his lips as they kissed each other for a few minutes and then broke off as she looked flushed and her face had a rosy pink tint on it, her skin shining in the moonlight, and she laid her head on his chest again. Thank you, she whispered, and he smiled and kissed her head, and she lulled to sleep listening to his heartbeat, and he too fell asleep, letting the exhaustion for the day take over him. The next morning, Kakashi came into the house, his back sore from sleeping on the roof, and Sakura came out from her room feeling well rested as they walked up to Naruto and Satsuki's room and went in and were stunned. There were Naruto and Satsuki in a single futon cuddling as she had her face buried in his neck while he wrapped close to him, his arms wrapped around her waist and the blanket covering them to their necks as Sakura thought they looked so cute together and yelled kawaii. And Kakashi giggled perversely as Satsuki's eyes fluttered open while Naruto groaned and pulled her closer as she looked through the sides of her eyes and sent an annoyed glare at Kakashi, who I smiled and had to jump as a kunai suddenly went through where his crotch was and he turned as white as a sheet. Satsuki had thrown it so fluidly as to not move as Naruto slept oblivious to everything happening around him. Get out or the next time I won't miss, she whispered in a threatening voice as he gulped, and after a moment sweat dropped. Why were his female genant threatening his precious jewels so frequently? The both of them scrambled and ran out, closing the door as she buried her face in his neck and fell into a deep slumber with a smile. Naruto woke up at noon feeling refreshed and no signs of exhaustion in his body as he gazed at Satsuki, who was wrapped up around him, and smiled. He gazed at the clock and saw that it was noon and thought he should wake her up. She looked so peaceful that he didn't want to wake her up but knew that he had to, then had an idea. He leaned down and pecked her soft and supple pink lips as her eyes fluttered open and she smiled. Ohio Satsuki-chan, he whispered. Ohio. She spoke softly and yawned cutely as she kissed him on the cheek, and both got up and went down to the dining table, both hungry, and saw some breakfast resting on the table as both sat down on the dining table and started eating in silence. Kakashi and Sakura got up from the couch and joined them. Kakashi was about to ask them if they were all right from their injuries when Sakura spoke up. So are you two a couple now? She asked suddenly, and Naruto choked on his food and Satsuki looked at her annoyed. None of your damn business, Banshee, she said, and Sakura glared at her, then stared at Naruto, who glanced at Satsuki, who was also staring at him and shrunk under their gazes. Not knowing what to do, he glanced at Kakashi for help, who I smiled and decided to help his blonde genon out of the situation. So Naruto, how are your injuries? Do you need any treatment or medical attention? He asked, knowing that he healed fast due to his tenet and didn't need any medical attention, and Naruto nodded gratefully at him for the change of topics. No sensei, I heal fast, I am fine. Just had a little exhaustion but a great night's sleep and I'm ready again, he said, and I smiled and nodded. Sakura forgot about the question and her jealousy for the moment, but Satsuki still remembered it. Naruto walked into his room to get ready for the day when he was pinned to the wall courtesy of Satsuki, who was glaring at him. Are you ashamed of me? She asked, and he looked at her confused. No, why would I ever be ashamed of you, Satsuki-chan? He asked cluelessly, and her glare intensified as her Sharingan blazed to life and he gulped harder. Then why did you dodge the question of the Banshee? Don't you like me? She asked, and he looked away, not meeting her eyes. I didn't think you would want rumors to be spread around the village of you concerning yourself with a clan-less orphan like me. I mean, I know how the people of the village treat me and you shouldn't associate yourself with me, he said, not meeting her eyes as her Sharingan disappeared and she turned his face to her, gazing lovingly into his eyes. I don't care what anyone thinks. Do you want to be with me? She spoke softly as his eyes watered, and he nodded and she smiled and pecked him. Good, then don't be ashamed to admit anything about us to anyone, all right? She spoke softly and rubbed his whisker marks, and he nodded as she let him go, and both got ready as they went to meet Haruka. 2 weeks later, at the completed bridge. The bridge was completed faster than expected, with the whole village helping out and Naruto there with his clones, as Kakashi too created some clones for help, and today was the day that Team 7 had to leave back for the Leaf Village. Haruka came running through the crowd and threw herself at Naruto, and he caught her as she cried in his chest. Angel-kun, don't go. She hiccuped, and he smiled. He had gotten her admitted to a really reputed orphanage nearby the Leaf Village, and they were going to take her there tomorrow, and until then Tazuna would take care of her. He had put the expensive fees for the orphanage to the account he used for his weapons that the old man gave him access to, and knew he had to talk to the old man about it and would pay for it through his missions pay to repay the old man. He rocked and cooed the little bundle as she calmed down. We talked about this, didn't we, Ruka-chan? You have to stay there and it's a great place. They'll take good care of you and you can write to me regularly. I have left my address with them and don't worry about anything. Ask for anything you need there and I'll take care of the money, alright? I'll come visit when I can. Now I have to go," he said, and she nodded and went back as Tsunami picked her up and he nodded to her with a grateful smile. He had to calm down Inari too when they finally said their goodbyes and left. "So what should we name the bridge?" Tsunami asked, and Tazuna replied, "I have a name in mind. We'll name it after the boy who changed the hearts of everyone in the village. The Great Naruto Bridge. Maybe someday the bridge will be famous when the name of the person it is named after gains fame to be known throughout the world," he said, and Tsunami giggled as she watched Naruto going, who had his hands in his pockets as Kakashi tried to make him read his book to learn some things he could do in the future, and Satsuki and Sakura bashed his head to the ground. "The Great Naruto Bridge, huh? It's a good name," she said, and everyone nodded. "The Great Naruto Bridge it is," he shouted, and everyone cheered as Team 7 walked back to the Leaf, unaware of the adventure awaiting for them there. Kushina Uzumaki and her daughters were currently being swept away in the whirlwind of anticipation and nervous energy. They were all currently packing in order to leave the capital so they could return to the village of her children's birth. The girls were bright-eyed and full of hope, eagerly awaiting to meet their big brother for the first time, but Kushina was more frightened than she had ever been in her life. "Will Naru-chan be able to accept me and forgive me? I'm so afraid that he won't," she thought to herself worriedly. As she was going through the motions of sealing her belongings up, her mind was left free to wander, and her stray thoughts brought her to reflect upon the last 13 years. 13 years, 5 years of horrible, inexcusable mistakes and 8 long, frustrating years of doing all she could to try to be part of her son's life, only to be blocked at almost every turn by a very determined and unyielding Hiruzen Sarutobi. Flashback. Kushina walked through what was left of the village gates at the crack of dawn toward the carriage that would take her and her new family to the capital with her newborn daughters in hand. As she was about to enter the carriage, she looked back and saw Hiruzen standing at the dislodged entryway to the village with a sleeping Naruto in his arms. The sickening disgust she saw in his eyes as he glared at her before he turned his back to her and walked towards the Hokage Tower hurt her immensely. He was the man that Minato respected above all others, and to see him regarding her with such awful disappointment, she could only hope that he would see the truth behind her words one day. She forgot her pain as she gazed longingly upon the 2 red-headed infant girls that were fast asleep in her arms, neither of them having a care in the world. She smiled lovingly at them, thankful that despite last night's horrific attack by the Kyuubi, or whatever tragedy might befall her, her family, her village, or even her nation, there was still so much purity and innocence in the world. That purity and innocence had to be guarded and preserved for as long as possible. They would be free from worry for now, at least, as despite Hiruzen's anger with her, he still cared enough to provide an Anbu detail to escort her and her babies to the capital. The trip took 2 full days at the slow pace the carriage moved at. During that time, the Anbu hadn't spoken with her, and neither had she bothered to speak with any of them, guessing that they likely felt the same way about her that Hiruzen did. She couldn't fault them for that, they didn't know any better, after all. When they had arrived at the capital and they had stopped at the courtyard of the daimyo's palace, she thanked her escorts, who merely disappeared without so much as a word of acknowledgement, and exited the carriage. To her surprise, the daimyo himself was there to greet her and welcome her personally. Feeling honored by the daimyo's personal greeting, she thanked her feudal lord and allowed him to lead her to the Uzumaki estate grounds within the capital proper. There was still quite an impressive staff of caretakers tending the grounds and the house, many of whom Kushina had even known as a young girl, and all of whom greeted her and welcomed her home warmly. All of them gushed over the 2 baby girls in her arms, commenting on how beautiful they were and expressing their sentiments over how proud Kushina must be of them. She entered the main house, put the girls down into the double crib that had been prepared for them, and went to settle down in the living room. She allowed herself a smile, despite her sadness at both Minato's passing and Hiruzen's disappointment. All that mattered at the moment was that she and her girls were home, safe and sound, and they would have a happy life in childhood. Here, the twins' first birthday came and went much more quickly than Kushina could have thought possible. Kushina had met the day with mixed feelings. The day would forever be bittersweet to her, and while she would remember the loss of her dearly departed husband and the death of her son by Kyuubi's possession, she was also very happy to celebrate the beginning of the girls' second year of life. She and the girls were very content and comfortable with the luxurious, safe and peaceful life that they were able to enjoy in the Fire Capital. She had written to Hiruzen, giving him the annual report she promised she would give to him every year detailing her health and the health of the girls, and when she began training them, she would let him know how that was progressing, too. The letter she wrote to him was forgettable for the most part, though she did ask whether he had dealt with the demon and avenged Minato's death yet, or whether he would want her to do it herself. She had been surprised when, the very next day, She answered a knock on her front door and opened it to a courier ninja. The courier had an official certified letter addressed from the Hokage to her, a letter that she had to sign for. Whatever this was, Hiruzen was sending it to her as the Hokage, not as an old family friend, and he wanted a guarantee that she received it. Signing for the letter and dismissing the courier ninja, she closed her door, took the letter to her kitchen table and unsealed it. As she opened the scroll and read its contents, unlike the letter she sent to Hiruzen, his words would forever burn themselves verbatim into her psyche. Uzumaki-san, while it gives me great relief to know that you and your daughters are well, and that you are enjoying the protection of the daimyo, the guardian ninja 12 and the samurai forces of the Land of Fire, your request to murder your innocent one-year-old son is not well received at all. As I informed you last year, your intent towards your son was seen even by your husband in his final few minutes of life, and he took steps to protect young Naruto from you. You dishonor Minato with your evil, twisted desire to harm an innocent, your own son, no less. He must be rolling in his grave with disgust and fury at how far you've fallen, and I have no doubts at all that he would spit in your face if he were to see you now. I myself am thoroughly ashamed and disgusted that I once thought of you as a daughter, no longer. From this day forward, you are my subordinate, and I am your Hokage, nothing more. As Hokage, I hereby prohibit you from returning to Konohagakure no Sado before your son and daughter's anticipated date of graduation from the Shinobi Academy. Exceptions to this executive order will be as follows. 1. If I summon you back, you are to answer my summons and come to Konoha immediately, where you will be escorted directly to my office upon your arrival at the gates. At no time during your visit will you be permitted to walk the village grounds without an escort. At the conclusion of the business for which I summon you, you will immediately be escorted back to the gates and sent on your way, once again prohibited from village entry. 2. If you send me advance notice via official communication of your intention to come to the village, and the date you expect to arrive, you may come to Konoha's gates, but you will be detained at the guard station until an Anbu can escort you to my office so that you can conduct whatever business you will need to conduct with me before once again being escorted back to the gates and sent on your way, once more being prohibited entry without either an official summons from me or advance notice of your arrival. Should you be found approaching Konoha's gates or within Konoha's walls without having met the conditions of either of these exceptions, I will have no choice but to assume that you have come to either harm young Naruto or end his life, and I will have you executed on sight for charges of treason against Konohagakure no Sado and conspiracy to commit murder of the Namikaze clan heir. After your execution, your daughters will be brought back to Konohagakure no Sado to be placed in an orphanage while allowing them to be raised and trained to be shinobi of Konoha. Also, be forewarned, Uzumaki-san, any attempts by you to harm or murder Minato's son through indirect methods, such as assassination, will also result in your execution and the remanding of your daughters to Konoha's orphanage system. As is standard protocol, this executive order has been officially stamped with the seal of the Hokage and submitted to the daimyo for his records and perusal. Ordered by Hiruzen Sarutobi, son daimyo Hokage, Konohagakure no Sado. Kushina was stunned beyond belief at what she had just been sent. To think that the professor that was always so kind to her had written such cold-hearted words shocked her. What was worse, he had not only written this as a letter to inform her that she was no longer considered a friend to him, but also as an executive order from the Hokage that had to be obeyed or she would suffer legal, and perhaps corporal ramifications. He had even used her last name instead of her first name to address her in the letter. She knew that the grounds for which he stated her punishment being immediate execution were clearly plausible. By Chakra or no, the demon that fit Naruto's description was classified as a Jinchuriki under the letter of the law, and to top it off, he was also the legal heir to the Namikaze clan. And even she couldn't legally defend herself against charges of treason and conspiracy against a clan heir. Despite the righteousness of her feelings and the justice of her path, her hands were tied, and as much as she hated the demon wearing her son's skin, she loved her daughters that much more. She gritted her teeth in anguish, a few tears escaping her eyes before she was able to force them back down. She penned a response back, stating her intention to visit Konoha tomorrow to speak with him directly. Once completed, she informed the nearest maid that she had business in the capital, and asked her to tend to her daughters until her return. It was 3 hours later that she received an official acknowledgement from Hiruzen via messenger hawk stating that the gate guards would be expecting her arrival tomorrow and that she would be provided an escort to his office. She left for Konoha early the next morning, once more leaving her children in the care of the Uzumaki staff, taking to the trees to travel quickly and arriving in 3 hours. As told, she was detained at the gate to wait for an Anbu to escort her to the Hokage's office. It was a male, hawk-masked Anbu that arrived to escort her to the Hokage, taking her to him via sunshine. Even the tone of his letter hadn't prepared her for the cold fury and near hatred that Hiruzen was now bearing down upon her. The meeting was quick, and the point driven home that she would receive no special favors of any kind from the Hokage due to feelings of past kinship. He had told her, in no uncertain terms, that while he couldn't officially declare her an enemy of Konoha, he now personally regarded her as one. She was escorted back to the gates and left the village very unsatisfied. A week later found Jiraiya at her door. Having been stricken from the Dode contract, he now had to manage his spy network directly by traveling and meeting with contacts himself. He had left Konoha to do this, and had informed Kushina that a visit to her and the girls would be a pleasant stop along the way. Of course, he needed to travel around the world and do his research, which he also informed her of without any shame, prompting her to pummel him into the ground. It was during this visit that he noticed Kushina wasn't herself. "Kushina, what's the matter? You haven't been acting like yourself since I got here," he expressed with concern. With a sigh, Kushina answered, "Sandaime-sama has forbidden me from returning to Konoha before it's time for the girls to become Shinin unless I'm either summoned by him or unless I have business there that I have to inform him of beforehand. She continued sadly, "He's basically ended our friendship and says that he now regards me as his enemy because of that demon." "I see," Jiraiya offered with a sigh of his own. "Well, that's not something I'm about to get involved in. I know how you both feel about the situation, so I'll just leave it alone." "Thank you, Jiraiya. I really appreciate that." Coincidentally, during the third day into Jiraiya's visit, Tsunade and Shizune also came by the Uzumaki estate. Sarutobi had informed Tsunade of Kushina's relocation for the time being, so she decided to stop in for a visit to her three godchildren. Kushina was about to speak up about Naruto not being her godson anymore, but Jiraiya stopped her with a firm grip on her shoulder and a stern glare while he shook his head in the negative slightly. "So I've seen the girls, but where's Naruto?" Tsunade asked happily. "Well, Tsunade," Jiraiya answered, "Sensei wanted the boy to remain in the village so that he could bond with it the same way his old man did. It was Minato's dying wish." While confused at such an explanation, Tsunade chose to accept it, such as it was, and didn't bring the matter up any further. All of them simply enjoyed spending time together and bonding with Kushina's red-headed toddlers, who surprised them all by taking their first steps in their presence. Another week had passed, and Jiraiya, Tsunade and Shizune all prepared to leave, Jiraiya to his business, and Tsunade and Shizune to theirs. Jiraiya had promised Kushina he would return by the girl's 5th birthday so that he could start training them with her. "Wait a minute, Jiraiya. What about Naruto's training?" Tsunade asked innocently, not noticing the darkening of Kushina's eyes, nor the icy frown on her face. "Don't worry about that boy," Jiraiya retorted with his usual bluster. "He's got the old man to look out for him and train him. He'll be alright, he won't need me." Tsunade, once again confused as the attitude Jiraiya was taking towards Naruto, which was so different from his attitude towards the girls, just nodded, but she narrowed her eyes in suspicion at him before taking Shizune and going on her way. Once she was out of sight, Jiraiya turned to Kushina, "All pretense gone. I only lied to her so that I could help you save face, Kushina. You do realize that Tsunade would cut any and all ties with you just like Sarutobi-sensei did if she were to learn the truth about your abandoning the boy, don't you?" "That demon isn't Naruto. He's the QB," she shouted at him in frustration. "Do you really think she'd buy that?" "I don't, and I can tell you for a fact that she won't, either. Now, I won't cover for you, again. Bear that in mind, Kushina." Kushina simply bristled in anger, but chose to say nothing. Jiraiya pulled his scroll onto his back and gave his goodbye, "I'll see you in 4 years." And with that, he walked out of the Uzumaki estate, departing the capital for places known only to him. Flashback end. 12 years since that last visit by Tsunade, and 8 years since Kushina had realized her gross mistakes and wrongs, and she still angrily asked herself how she could have not only been so stupid as to jump to the conclusion that Naruto was the QB without properly inspecting his seal first, but so evil-hearted as to not want to even entertain the hope that Naruto was still alive and well. What had come over her during all that time? To this day, she still found herself wanting for an answer. She only knew that there was no excuse for it. She continued to pack up the things she would be taking to Konoha with her, completely unaware that a certain Hokage was reflecting back on those turbulent days as well. Konohagakure no Sato. "It won't be long, now," Hiruzen Sarutobi mused to himself morbidly. "Kushina will be coming back here in a few months with her daughters once their training is completed to her and Jiraiya's satisfaction. What the hell am I supposed to tell Naruto about all of this?" Hiruzen had made a good many mistakes and questionable judgment calls regarding Naruto, judgment calls and mistakes over what to tell him, what not to tell him, how to handle the knowledge that he'd been keeping from Naruto for all of these years, all for his own safety and to keep him as stable as he possibly could. given the poor boy's circumstances. Thinking of Kushina made him think back to the day he gave Jiraiya the photo of baby Naruto with his seal exposed, the day which would mark the beginning of his own mistakes regarding the boy and his mother. Flashback. Hiruzen was in his office going through the usual paperwork he dealt with. It was a month before Naruto's 5th birthday, and he was still working to fit in time to celebrate it with him. His train of thought was interrupted as Jiraiya came in through the window. Sarutobi quickly looked at him and nodded, not even cracking so much as a smile. He could tell that Jiraiya was perplexed. After all, he usually smiled at seeing his former student but just couldn't bring himself to do so after his last disappointing encounter with him on the night of Naruto's birth. Of course, he knew that Jiraiya would also likely attribute it to the pressure he must be under with the work of the village. But the truth was that Hiruzen had lost almost all respect for his student and eventually came to realize that, while he had trained 3 great shinobi, they were lousy people. Of the 3 of them, Jiraiya was the only one that had continued to give Hiruzen any hope, and that hope was dashed on the night of his successor's children's births. Now, he regarded all 3 of them as nothing more than failures and disappointments. "Hey old man, how's it going?" Jiraiya asked jovially. "I'm doing fine, Jiraiya," he responded in a near monotone, and asked, "How are you?" Without even bothering to look up from his paperwork, not noticing Jiraiya's grin. "I'm doing great. My research is coming along well and I'm excited to train the twins after their birthday when I return to Kushina. Unfortunately, I won't make it back to the party in time and I'll miss all those beautiful noble women," he whined, to which Hiruzen sighed and just shook his head in resignation. Jiraiya hadn't changed at all over the years. "Hey, how's the kid, what was his name?" he asked with a finger on his chin. Hiruzen stopped moving his calligraphy brush at this. With an annoyed and disappointed grimace, he slowly looked up at Jiraiya and responded in quiet disbelief, "Seriously, Jiraiya? What was his name? Do you seriously mean to tell me that your late student's family means so little to you that you can't even remember the name of your own godson?" "Huh?" Jiraiya responded cluelessly before retorting with indignation, "What do you mean? I do care for Minato's family. I've always made sure to keep tabs on Mito and Narumi." "Really, now? And if they didn't tie into your almighty prophecy, would you still care as much?" Jiraiya frowned darkly and asked in a low tone, "And just what is that supposed to mean, sensei?" Unfazed, Hiruzen proceeded to rebuke his student. "Jiraiya, your late student's family means far less to you than this prophecy does, which has given you an overwhelmingly overinflated sense of self-importance. The only reason you even remember Mito and Narumi's names is because you're convinced that they're the children of this prophecy, and I only know that because training them in their relation to the prophecy is all you ever talk about." Hiruzen then added sarcastically, "Minato must be looking towards you from the afterlife with such pride, especially with how much you care for his son. What was his name?" Jiraiya's dark frown left his face after that, replaced with a frown of utter shame. Before he could say anything else, Hiruzen spoke up, "But to answer your question, Naruto is doing fine, although he's a very lonely boy. He hasn't been able to make any friends at all because the adults in the village keep their children away from him." "Oh, well, I'm glad to hear he's okay. And I suppose he'll make friends in time," Jiraiya offered, though his shame and a sense of doubt could be heard in his tone. "He takes after his father," Hiruzen told him, bringing Jiraiya's gaze right to his with a saddened expression. "He's the spitting image of him, and not just in his looks. He's also inherited Minato's genius-level intellect as well. In fact, I would dare say he's an even greater genius than Minato was. If I could do so, I'd take him as a student of my own." Hiruzen's eyes narrowed in resignation. God knows it would be nice to have a student that didn't end up as a failure and an utter disappointment as a human being like the 3 of you did. Jiraiya's sadness became laced with hurt at Hiruzen's claim. He'd seen that look on his sensei's face before, though. Hiruzen had all but given up on his former students. Jiraiya began to look around the room looking for something to latch his sight and thoughts onto. He saw a picture of Naruto when he was a baby in Hiruzen's arms on his desk and picked it up. Naruto was in his diapers and the seal on his stomach was clearly visible. Jiraiya, now intrigued, narrowed his eyes and began to do a visual inspection of the seal in the photograph. The complexity of the seal was far beyond anything he had ever seen. Minato had outdone even the greatest of the Uzumaki seal masters by combining 2 such strong seals along with several minor ones perfectly, and had synchronized them to perfection. In his last moments, Minato Namikaze had indeed created his masterpiece. "Hey old man, I am taking this picture. I'd like to study the seal on Naruto. Do you mind?" he asked and Hiruzen nodded. "Take it. I have copies. I'll put another one here," he said. Jiraiya nodded and left through the window, not even saying goodbye. Hiruzen closed his eyes and sighed once more. Only one word seemed to fit for all of the people once connected to Minato Namikaze, disappointment. And these twilight years of his life seemed to be filled with nothing but disappointment, with Naruto being the only bright spot in it. Flashback end. As much as Hiruzen hated paperwork, he was actually finding it a welcome distraction to the impending dilemma that would blow up in his face if he didn't take steps to start resolving it. Fire capital. Kushina had finished packing her bedroom, and was now sealing up her kitchen goods. Her cast iron skillet was still as beautiful and black as the day she had first acquired it. She'd taken very good care of it and used it to cook countless meals for herself and her girls. But with that thought, she began to think of all the meals she had never cooked for her son. It was when she was preparing this particular pan for use that the horrible truth had been made known to her. Flashback. It had been a month since Kushina had thrown the twins' 5th birthday party and she had started training them. She had been trying to teach them how to unlock their chakra, and even with her guidance, the twins had just succeeded this morning. That had to be some kind of record. She was currently starting to cook dinner, having just turned on the stove, heating up her cast iron skillet so she could make a stir-fry. It was as she was doing this that she heard Jiraiya barge in through the front door and bellow a greeting. Kushina turned off the stove and ran out of the kitchen to greet him, smiling as she saw him for the first time in almost 4 years. She tackled him in a hug as he also threw his arms around her and spun her around in a couple of circles. "Oh, wow, it's good to be back here," Jiraiya exclaimed. "I'm glad you're here now, Jiraiya," Kushina offered. "I'm just getting dinner ready, and I'm sure you're hungry." "You have no idea," Kushina called in Mito and Narumi, introducing them to their grandpa Jiraiya. Both of them managed to find a place in his heart quite easily as he got on the floor with them and played with them until dinner was ready. The meal was pleasant, with Jiraiya getting to know the two excitable little red-headed rascals. It was shortly after the meal was over that Kushina declared the girls' bedtime. Both of them groaned but complied, knowing better than to argue with their scary mother. Once they were in bed and asleep, Kushina began talking to Jiraiya, who was smiling fondly over his time with the girls. "Once again, I've had one hell of a time trying to teach the girls. They're both a bit slow, definitely more physical than cerebral, if you get my drift." Jiraiya's smile quickly faded upon hearing this, replaced by a melancholy frown as though he'd been reminded of something painful. "What's the matter?" Kushina asked him, concerned. "Hey Kushina, I need you to take a look at something," he answered before pulling a couple of pictures out of his pocket and handing her one of them. Kushina examined the picture she was given. It was a blown-up image of a very complex seal. She looked at it critically, not understanding what he wanted her to do. "Study that seal carefully, Kushina," Jiraiya instructed, "and tell me what you see." She did as she was asked, studying the seal very carefully. It took her almost half an hour to determine the full capabilities of this seal. She even had to pull out some paper and a pen so that she could take some notes to keep from missing some of the functions. It wasn't just a seal, it was a magnificent work of art. Even the seals on the girls' stomachs didn't compare to what she was looking at. It was far beyond anything she was capable of. She would dare say that no Uzumaki had ever made a seal so complex or so perfect. She had seen the Uzumaki clan's works on seals, and none of them described anything that was as complex as the seal in Jiraiya's picture. "It's amazing the way the seals in this array are all synchronized, even with the two high-powered base seals. This could seal off anything the seal master wanted and it would work perfectly. I don't think I could even begin to replicate this," she exclaimed excitedly. "What would you imagine the limits of that seal being?" Jiraiya asked. "I don't think it has any," Kushina exclaimed, looking at it. "I'd imagine it could seal all 9 of the Baijiu into one host and still have enough power for more." "So then, this is a seal you would trust without a doubt?" "I would trust this seal with my life. If..." Kushina's voice saddened, breaking slightly. "If only this seal had been used with Naruto, I'd still have my son." "Kushina," Jiraiya began sadly, letting out a heavy sigh before handing her the second picture and telling her, "That is Naruto's seal." Her eyes went wide in dumbfounded, fear-filled shock. What did you just say?" "This seal was Minato's last work, his masterpiece," Jiraiya explained, pointing to the second picture, a picture of Naruto as a baby with his seal exposed, with Hiruzen cooing at him while he appeared to be giggling happily. He put it on Naruto to seal the soul and body of the Kyuubi completely, making sure it had no chance of ever taking over his own son. "I was surprised myself when I saw this picture in Sensei's office, but Minato really outdid himself with this one. Hell, he outdid every seal master I've ever heard of when he made this." She stood up in horror and took a step back only to collapse a moment later, her legs refusing to hold her up. Her eyes began to well with tears of horror, anguish and torturous remorse. How could she not have seen the complexity of the seal that night she had checked the triplets? She remembered back to the night of their birth, the ripping of the Baijiu from her body, and the emotional distress of Minato, knowing that he was taking his dying breaths. She hadn't even bothered to study the seals at length until she'd made it here. She didn't notice the intricacies of the seals at first glance, she had just stabilized them with her chakra as quickly as possible. "No," she whispered out in utter horror, her tears beginning to fall. 5 years. 5 years where she could have had her son with her there. 5 years of precious moments and memories, thrown away. "No," she whispered out again, putting her hands to her mouth. She'd never remember seeing his first steps. "No," she groaned out. She'd never remember hearing his first words. "No." She began to raise her voice as sobs began forcing their way up from her throat. 5 years of missed birthdays, missed presents, missed chances to tuck him into bed and kiss him goodnight. She didn't even have a clue as to how he was living, or if he was healthy and happy, or if anyone was taking care of him. "No," she yelled with her eyes clenched shut, her voice completely broken as her sobs gave way to bawling. She clutched the picture of Naruto to her chest as she did this, hanging her head and almost collapsing to the floor if not for Jiraiya moving fast enough to catch her and hold her to himself while she wept uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Kushina," he offered. He simply didn't have the heart to remind her that he and Sarutobi had told her of what she was just now acknowledging, that Naruto was in fact her son, that he was alive and well, and that he'd never been possessed by the Kyuubi at any point in his brief life. "Oh my god, what have I done?" she wailed, "My baby, my Naru-chan. I left him alone, I abandoned him. She cried even louder, "I even threatened to kill him. What have I done?" Her cries became so forceful that she lost the ability to form words. Her wails and bawls were such that her body heaved up and down with each sob that forced its way out. This went on for almost half an hour before Kushina had cried herself hoarse. Jiraiya marveled at the fact that the girls had remained in their room fast asleep. Kushina must have placed silencing seals in the rooms so that their rest wouldn't be disturbed from any errant noises around the house. "Oh god," she whispered with renewed horror, "what would Minato think of me if he could see me now? What would he say to me?" "Kushina, Minato already knew this would happen," Jiraiya explained. "Sensei told me that Minato saw how you looked at Naruto and he took steps in case what he feared to be the worst happened." And Kushina sniffled, "It did. I did the worst thing imaginable. I abandoned his son, my son." In a sudden burst of determination, she wiped away her tears and stood up, moving towards her door as Jiraiya watched on in confusion. "Where are you going, Kushina?" he asked. Without stopping, she answered, "I need to send a message to Konoha by messenger hawk. I'm going to tell Sundaime-sama to expect me tomorrow morning." "You're gonna what?" "I'm bringing my baby boy home," she fired back, opening and closing the front door as she left through it. She was back a few minutes later, and Jiraiya had just waited for her return in the living room. "Kushina, are you sure you know what you're doing?" Jiraiya asked warningly. "It doesn't matter if I do or not, I'm bringing my Naru-chan home. I'm going to apologize for not being there and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it up to him. I won't let him stay alone anymore. As soon as I get the message, I'm leaving for Konoha." Both of them stayed up throughout the night. It was a couple of hours before dawn that a messenger hawk delivered a response from Sarutobi, stating the usual conditions. Kushina stood up and prepared to leave the house once more. "I'm heading out, Jiraiya. Take care of Narumi and Mito for me. I'll be back as soon as I can." She left the house before he could say anything more, speeding her way to Konoha as fast as her legs in the treetops allowed. That's the end guys. If you enjoyed then make sure to leave a comment. This is Chaos Shinobi signing off.